Which camera should you pair with a lens like this? And I've got 3 different copies here. I've got more Olympus cameras too. I've got Em1 Mark 1s, I've got the Em1 Mark 2, but I just got the Em1 Mark 3. The 2 that I've tested the most though, doing wildlife photography with this lens, has been the Em1X and of course the OM1. I don't have an OM1 Mark 2, but maybe I will here eventually. When I beat my cancer, then I'll start buying expensive stuff again. So let's talk about the Em1 Mark 3 first. So I would say this camera just, it has pro capture, okay? And that is really an essential thing, but it doesn't have the bird detect or wildlife detect for that matter in it. And so it really isn't a contender. It's not worth, I say it's not worth using. Okay, which kind of leaves the OM1 or the OM1 Mark II, of which the only difference in the OM1 and the OM1 Mark II is there's been some software updates to the Mark II, and also there's a bigger buffer on the OM1 Mark II, which is actually something that is kind of a big deal, because I will tell you right now that when you use Pro Capture with this camera, filling the buffer is something that can happen to you, especially when there's a lot of action going on. The Em1X, you'll never fill the buffer on this camera. Okay, it just goes and goes and goes and goes. Basically, just the card is your limit, really. Now, let me preface one other thing here. So, I have neuropathy, and neuropathy is basically nerve damage, and mine is getting better. It's because of the chemo that I'm on or have been on, but anyways, it is getting better. However, that means that with the OM1, because the buttons on this camera are all kind of the same size, and they all kind of feel the same, and they're a lot smaller, I can't feel the buttons in this camera. Okay? So my use and limit with this guy, it's a lot harder for me to use my OM1. And I know for the last year or so, I've actually in a lot of ways gone back to my Em1X. Now for astrophotography, I still use this guy because the sensor is, a lot better than the older ones were. But the Em1X, like, I can actually feel all the buttons, and I can, without looking at it, know what I'm doing with the camera. And for wildlife photography, and especially a lens like this, that's really kind of essential, because you shouldn't be taking your eye away from the viewfinder and looking at the buttons that you're pressing, all right? Now, another thing is the whole, people are going to say the balance thing, okay? So the Em1X with this lens, it feels really good, okay? It's basically, these two were designed around the same time, all right? And they were probably designed with the same kind of mindset and thinking, and Olympus, at the time, Olympus was kind of all on the same page, so to speak, when this lens was designed and this camera was designed. And they really are designed together. The OM1, I mean, this is a newer generation of kind of design. Yes, it's pretty much all the same engineers, but a lot has changed since this was around, okay? Or at least with this was being designed. As far as like the buttons go, I mean, especially with my neuropathy, I prefer the Em1X right now. Okay? Now, the bird detect in the OM1 is a little bit better. Tiny bit, but it's really just a tiny bit, okay? I've shot sandpipers with this guy, and sandpipers are very difficult, and they move really fast. It's almost as fast as shooting a hummingbird. But yeah, this guy can keep up pretty good with just about any kind of bird. The OM1 though, I think there has been an update now that it kind of allows it to shoot through vegetation a little bit better than the Em1X does. Now, of course, there's obviously a big cost difference between the two of them. The Em1X is quite a bit cheaper because you can buy it used. Even a refurbished one that's, or basically one that's like still brand new is going to cost less than an OM1 or an OM1 Mark II. Now, I will say though that the viewfinder, I mean, really every technological feature of the OM1 is a little better than the Em1X is, okay? The viewfinder is better, the menu's better, the LCD is better, the camera does actually perform about as fast, maybe just a hair faster in the OM1, and probably the OM1 Mark II would be even a little bit faster than that, although it would be pretty difficult to measure the two. But yeah, still I find myself going back to the Em1X, and that is the biggest reason, of course, is because of my neuropathy. Okay, that's why. Now, let's talk about like the whole battery grip thing. Okay, so for me, one of the biggest reasons, you'll see I've got my battery grip on here. The biggest reason why I would use a battery grip with a lens like this is not necessarily to use it in portrait mode, but because when I'm holding on to it, it's easier for me to use all 4 of my fingers to hold the camera when the battery grip is in place. With the Em1X, I've got just, there's basically, if you look at the bottom of my last finger, there is stuff that it's running into, and so I have more stability, and more stability, of course, means that there's less user fatigue using a lens like this. I found that when using this camera without the battery grip, there was actually more fatigue, okay? And I know some of you are saying, well, what about the extra weight? Well, with the battery grip, you can take the battery out and you can use it without the battery. Just use the battery in the camera. Without the battery in this grip is like air, okay? There's like nothing to it at all. And then it basically becomes just the camera's weight, only you get the additional support and the extra finger room to grab this thing with all 4 fingers. And I don't even have that big of hands. I know a lot of Americans have much bigger hands than I do. I can see where trying to grab this thing without a battery grip would be a real issue for a lot of photographers out there. You know, because all things considering, I actually kind of have small hands. And my fingers are kind of small, at least. So yeah, I really like the Em1X, and I kind of push people towards the Em1X maybe a lot more just because of my neuropathy and everything. And by the way, neuropathy is actually not something that's that uncommon. As I've talked to other people, especially in the age bracket of people that buy lenses like this, a lot of them have neuropathy as well, because they've either had cancer, or maybe they've been on some medication that has given them neuropathy, or they've got neuropathy just through, you know, nerve damage, like cut a finger or something and they lost it and lost feeling in 1 or 2 fingers or something like that. So yeah, if you have neuropathy or any kind of like nerve damage in your fingers, I would highly recommend the Em1X, perhaps over the OM1, because of the better buttons on it and so forth. Because when I use this guy, I just feel like there are no barriers between me and the camera. With the OM1, there's always that, I'm always fighting with the buttons, so to speak, to kind of use this camera. I mean, it's a great camera and everything, but like I said, I'm fighting with the buttons, and it's because of my neuropathy. But yeah, my ode, which one do I like? Which one do I recommend? Oh man, it's a toss-up, because like this has got great things, this has got great things, okay? Now, the viewfinder in this guy, it is sharper. It's much sharper than the Em1X is. And so with this one, I can see focus a lot better because it's a sharper viewfinder. This one here, of course, I can't, but then again, I'm also using autofocus pretty much all the time. So that's something that, I don't know, maybe it is a concern for you, maybe it is not. But I don't know, those are like some of my kind of closing thoughts on this lens. I have to send this lens back here very soon, and so I thought I'd get this one last video out there about it. I gotta say, this thing's really fun to use for both astrophotography and for wildlife. It is truly a huge upgrade. And like I said, if you are maybe on the edge with your budget, first off, maybe consider buying a used one. You can get the used versions of this lens now for just a little bit over $5,000, which is not much. And then, you know, maybe opt away from the OM1 and get an Em1X, because, you know, you can get an Em1X now, a beat up one for about 500, you know, and a really nice one for 700 to 1,000, okay? And I promise you that the performance difference between this guy and this guy for birds really isn't that gigantic. It's not as huge as you would probably think it would be. Although I've never tried an OM1 Mark II. Maybe that one's quite a bit better. You'll have to read other reviews or watch other reviews in order to kind of draw that conclusion. But, you know, those are my thoughts. I'm pretty hardy towards the Em1X, and I did find myself, like, whenever I had this camera on here, I was like, oh, I miss my Em1X, like the feel of everything, and also, like, here's another thing with the Em1X as well. There's 2 batteries in here. You don't have to use both. You can use just one of those batteries if you want to, like, shave some weight off of this guy and so forth. Now, this lens does use more battery power to run, just because the optic systems that are moving around in here in order to do focus, in order to do image stabilization, they require more power. So I gotta say, a second battery did come in handy, especially in astrophotography. Good grief. I ran through both batteries in the camera in just a little over an hour using this guy, and that's because the optic system in here that does the image stabilization has to be held in place by current, okay? And so it really drained the batteries fast. So yeah, 2 batteries is really kind of a nice thing to have. But for wildlife photography, you know, if you're only going out for like a 1-hour stint, I think you will be just fine. You know, especially since you're not dealing with like really cold temperatures like I do at night when I do my astrophotography. So, gonna miss this guy. And there is an Em1 Mark III Astro version out there. I'm gonna try to get one. We'll see. Okay, I've tried a couple of different sources to see if I can get one. I know it's a little expensive, but I really want one, just because, you know, it's probably the one thing that I'm willing to buy, even though I'm kind of doing this cancer battle right now, despite the cost, just because, you know, it is such a unique item. And if I don't get one now, I might not ever be able to get one, and I don't want to kind of run into that situation. But there we go. Gonna miss this guy. Hope you enjoyed seeing some of my videos with it, and perhaps I brought some unique insights that you haven't seen on any other channels.